Donald Trump may have announced a ceasefire in Iran, but it's done little to quieten the growing wave of Democratic lawmakers calling for his removal via the 25th Amendment. Tell us more.
Yes, Jenny, it's true that scores of Democrats have been raising the alarm about Donald Trump's mental stability and have been calling for his removal, saying that he is unfit to serve. And this is after he used genocidal language at Iran on Tuesday, where he posted, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." There was also his expletive-laden Easter Sunday post where he told Iran to open the strait or that they will be living in hell. And this tentative ceasefire agreement hasn't done much to quash these calls for removal, because over 80 House Democrats have made social media posts saying that Trump's cabinet should invoke the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, declaring him unfit to serve, or Congress should impeach and convict him, or both.
Adam here, and this might be our biggest episode yet. Elected members of Congress have publicly called for Trump's removal after he threatened to destroy an entire civilization. The statement has triggered constitutional machinery and flooded congressional phone lines in a way not seen before in his second term. The specific phrase that triggered all of this, "A whole civilization will die tonight," came from the president himself during his late March and early April ultimatum rhetoric surrounding the Iran ceasefire deadline. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't taken out of context. It was a direct, unvarnished statement from the commander-in-chief about what would happen if Iran did not meet his demands. And the reaction from the international community, from legal experts, from human rights organizations, and from members of Congress was swift and damning. Amnesty International characterized the statement as an open threat to commit an illegal attack on civilians. Not a policy disagreement, not a difference of opinion about diplomatic strategy, a threat of illegal action against civilian populations.
Congressional Democrats are now calling for President Trump's removal from office following his extreme threats against Iran. They say the ceasefire isn't enough and are calling for Congress to rein in the Trump administration.
Well, a 2-week ceasefire is insufficient. We need a permanent end to Donald Trump's reckless war of choice. House Democrats have demanded that Speaker Mike Johnson immediately reconvene the House back into session so we can move a war powers.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yesterday, more than 70 lawmakers in separate posts on social media suggested the president's cabinet must invoke the 25th Amendment and admit he's unfit for office. Congress should pass impeachment articles and vote to convict him, or both. During his first term, he was impeached twice and acquitted. We reached out to state lawmakers, or those who represent California, to pose our accountability question asking, do you support President Trump's actions in Iran or oppose them? Here's what they told us. California Senator Adam Schiff says, quote, Congress must finally reclaim its war power from this increasingly dangerous president before more service members get killed.
Representative Sarah Jacobs, a member of the Armed Services Committee, went even further. She said that threatening genocide is a violation of both international law and federal statutes, and that Congress must treat it as more than just rhetoric. That framing is critical because it moves the conversation from the realm of political criticism to the realm of legal accountability. When a president's words can be plausibly interpreted as a threat of genocide, the constitutional and legal implications shift dramatically. Representative Seth Moulton, an Iraq War combat veteran with firsthand experience of the horrors of military conflict, argued that Trump has already committed an impeachable offense and urged Congress to move swiftly to remove him before he could inflict more damage. His military service gave his words a specific weight that standard partisan criticism could never carry. The response from advocacy organizations was equally dramatic. Greenpeace USA unfurled a banner at the White House itself, a direct action that signaled the depth of their concern. The banner called for Trump's immediate removal for war crimes and explicitly urged the vice president and cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment.
And Bay Area Congress members Ro Khanna and Nancy Pelosi, among more than 50 House Democrats, calling for Congress to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. That was in response to his social media post earlier today, where he wrote of Iran, quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight."
He's threatening the entire destruction of a civilization. He is calling Iranians animals. He is showing a total disregard for the humanity of people in Iran, in Gaza, in Cuba. This is a moral crime. It is a war crime. We need to be demanding that Congress convene today, and we need to be invoking the 25th Amendment.
We heard statements from a person whose mental stability has to be questioned for the statements that he has made about obliterating a civilization. A civilization. While the Republicans want to be seen and not willing to exercise the 25th Amendment, we have to do that in the public.
Greenpeace's statement was precise and legally grounded. They said Trump is unfit for office and that his civilization will die. Tonight's statement was an obvious threat to commit an illegal attack on civilians. This wasn't a generic call for impeachment from a partisan organization. It was a specific invocation of constitutional mechanisms by an organization that has historically focused on environmental issues rather than presidential removal questions. The volume of constituent calls responding to all of this was staggering and genuinely revealing about how the public was reacting. Congressional offices were inundated. One Democratic office found 75 Iran-related voicemails after just a single day away from the phones. Another office logged 257 calls in 24 hours, the most they had ever recorded on any issue in their entire history of operation. A strategist quoted in the reporting on this situation said something that should make everyone pay attention.
Democrats are advocating for invoking the 25th Amendment and impeachment to remove President Trump from office. It comes after the president's threat yesterday that the whole civilization will die in Iran. And while President Trump did not follow through on the threat, the list of Democrats seeking his removal continues to grow. Here to break it down is The Hill's White House columnist Niall Stanage. Hey, Niall. So at least 70 Democrats have called for President Trump's cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. There's no indication that that is being considered. But how do you think we should consider this, maybe on a messaging standpoint from Democrats?
I think messaging is the key word, Drew. This is really a messaging tactic or a messaging maneuver to try to underscore what Democrats see as an instability on the part of the president. They are trying to dramatize that by suggesting the 25th Amendment should be invoked to essentially kick him out. There is no possibility that that will happen, not least because the cabinet is full of his allies.
This was not a coordinated campaign. It was genuine alarm from constituents reacting to Trump's words. That distinction matters enormously. Coordinated campaigns can produce call volumes through organizational mobilization, and their political weight is often discounted accordingly. But genuine alarm, individual constituents picking up the phone without being directed to do so by some advocacy organization's action alert, reflects a different and far more significant political phenomenon. It means the statement reached people who were not already mobilized political activists. It means the reaction came from the general public rather than from the organized opposition. The 257 calls in a single congressional office in a single day, specifically about Iran, impeachment, and the 25th Amendment is the kind of constituent contact volume that changes political calculations for members of Congress about whether and how loudly to engage with the removal conversation. It tells them that their constituents are paying attention, that they are alarmed, and that they expect their representatives to do something about it. That kind of public pressure is what moves political mountains, even when the constitutional mechanisms for removal seem politically impossible in the current alignment. Now, let me be absolutely clear about what this removal conversation actually is and what it is not. There is no organized, credible, imminent effort to remove Trump from office right now. The Democratic Party is in the minority in the House, and Republican leaders have already blocked 2 impeachment attempts this term. The 25th Amendment would require the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to turn on Trump, and there is no evidence that any of them are currently preparing to do that. Democratic Party leadership, including Hakeem Jeffries, has so far avoided formally backing a new impeachment drive. They are being cautious, strategic, and realistic about what is achievable given the current political mathematics. But what is happening is something different from an organized removal process, yet still politically significant in its own right. The removal conversation has moved from fringe to mainstream. Congressional offices are receiving record volumes of constituent calls about Iran and the 25th Amendment. Elected members of Congress are saying publicly that Trump has committed impeachable offenses. Major advocacy organizations are specifically calling for cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment. And even some voices on the right, as reported, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, have at least flirted with 25th Amendment talk over his Iran brinkmanship. The turmoil in this situation is the turmoil of those combined pressures landing on an administration that is simultaneously managing a fragile ceasefire, a deal that is close but not signed, record low approval ratings, and now a fresh wave of calls for the president's removal. That is a political firestorm. Not a palace coup, but a genuine and documented escalation in the removal conversation that has real political consequences. The specific sequence of events matters for understanding why this situation developed the way it did. The whole civilization statement came in the context of Trump's Iran war ultimatum rhetoric. He warned that if Iran did not meet his deadline, a whole civilization would die tonight. The international response was immediate. Amnesty International's assessment of Trump's first 100 days specifically highlighted his Iran statements as part of a broader pattern of attacks on human rights that it documented as unprecedented in scope and severity. The legal framing that Representative Jacobs applied, threatening genocide, is a violation of both international law and federal statutes, reflects the specific legal categories that have been brought to bear on this situation. Under the Genocide Convention, to which the United States is a party, threatening to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group constitutes a specific legal category of prohibited conduct. Whether Trump's statement meets the legal threshold for a genocide threat as a matter of statutory interpretation and specific intent is a genuinely contested legal question. But the statement that a whole civilization will die tonight is the kind of language that produces that legal question. The combination of factors that produce the current situation is worth examining carefully. A deeply unpopular war, with only 27% public support, lower than Vietnam in its final years. An administration whose approval numbers were already at record lows. A president making apocalyptic public rhetoric about civilian civilization-level destruction. And a Congress that is being flooded with constituent calls demanding accountability. All of these factors combine to produce the specific kind of political pressure that has generated the current removal conversation. The voices calling for removal are significant, not just because they exist, but because of who they are and what they represent. Seth Moulton is a Marine veteran who served in the Iraq War. He is not a fringe progressive who specializes in maximalist political statements. He is a member who brings military credibility to his assessment of what constitutes appropriate use of force and what constitutes conduct that threatens American interests. When Moulton says Trump has already committed an impeachable offense and that Congress should move swiftly to remove him, that statement comes with a specific authority that a standard progressive caucus call for impeachment would not carry in the same way. His combat experience gives him a perspective that other members simply cannot match. Sarah Jacobs is a member of the Armed Services Committee, one of the committees that is most directly involved in oversight of the Iran war. Her specific framing that threatening genocide is a violation of international law and federal statutes, and that Congress must treat it as more than just rhetoric, is precisely the framing that turns a political criticism into a legal accountability argument. The distinction between the two matters enormously. Political criticism says the president made a bad decision. Legal accountability argument says the president's words may constitute a specific legal violation that Congress has a specific constitutional responsibility to address. That distinction is what makes the current removal conversation different from the general ongoing opposition to Trump's Iran policy. The Constituent call volume is the piece of this story that reveals the most about where the political energy actually is. The reporting that congressional offices were flooded with calls and emails after Trump's civilization will die statement is not anecdotal. It is documented. One Democratic office found 75 Iran-related voicemails after a single day away from the phones. Another logged 257 calls in 24 hours, the most they had ever tracked. A strategist quoted in the reporting said specifically that this was genuine alarm rather than a coordinated campaign. That distinction is important. Coordinated campaigns produce call volumes through organizational mobilization, and their political weight is discounted accordingly. Genuine alarm, individual constituents picking up the phone without being directed to do so by an advocacy organization's action alert, reflects a different and more significant political phenomenon. It means the statement reached people who are not already mobilized political activists. It means the reaction came from the general public rather than from the organized opposition. And 257 calls in a single congressional office in a single day specifically about Iran, impeachment, and the 25th Amendment is the kind of constituent contact volume that moves a political calculation for members of Congress about whether and how loudly to engage with the removal conversation. The Greenpeace banner at the White House is significant for what it represents symbolically, and for the specific legal and constitutional framing it used. Greenpeace is not a partisan political organization. It is an environmental advocacy group that has a long history of nonviolent direct action on issues it considers to involve fundamental ethical violations. When Greenpeace decides to unfurl a banner at the White House, calling for Trump's immediate removal for war crimes, and specifically urging the Vice President and Cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment, it is making a specific judgment that the Iran war has crossed a threshold that moves it from policy disagreement into the category of fundamental ethical and legal violation. The specific call for the Vice President and Cabinet to act under the 25th Amendment is the most legally precise element of the advocacy because it identifies the specific constitutional mechanism that could be used for removal and the specific actors who have the constitutional authority to initiate it. Greenpeace's framing that Trump's civilization will die statement is an obvious threat to commit an illegal attack on civilians, and that cabinet members have a duty to stop him is the most direct articulation of the argument that the 25th Amendment should be invoked not because the president is physically incapacitated, but because his stated intentions represent a threat of such severity that the people around him have a constitutional obligation to act. The reporting about Marjorie Taylor Greene deserves specific attention because it represents the most unusual data point in the entire removal conversation. MTG has been one of Trump's most consistent and most vocal congressional allies. She has defended him on issues where other Republicans have been silent or critical. And yet, reporting indicates that even she has been among the voices that have flirted with the idea of using the 25th Amendment over his Iran brinkmanship. The reporting notes that there is no organized conservative push, and that caveat matters for assessing the political significance of her comment. But the fact that one of Trump's most reliable defenders has even raised the possibility in public, even tentatively, even without committing to support it, is a data point about where the political calculus among some Trump supporters is moving in response to his Iran conduct. It is not a sign that a conservative removal effort is forming. It is a sign that the specific character of Trump's Iran behavior, the civilization will die rhetoric, the repeated deadline setting and deadline backing off, the unresolved ceasefire situation, has produced enough concern even among allies that the removal question is not exclusively a Democratic or progressive framing. The gap between the vocal Democrats calling for removal and leadership's more cautious posture is itself a significant piece of the political picture. The reporting indicates that Hakeem Jeffries has so far avoided formally backing a new impeachment drive. Democratic leadership is instead focusing on war powers legislation, the effort to force Trump to seek congressional authorization before any new Iran strikes, while quietly hosting calls about accountability and the 25th Amendment as a pressure mechanism rather than as an imminent operational plan. That distinction between pressure mechanism and operational plan is the one that most accurately describes the current state of the removal conversation. The goal of the volume of calls, public statements, Greenpeace banners, and congressional floor speeches is not primarily to produce an actual 25th Amendment invocation or impeachment in the near term, because the political math of Republican control of Congress makes those outcomes highly improbable. The goal is to generate enough sustained political pressure on the administration, enough public visibility for the argument that Trump's Iran conduct has crossed legal and constitutional lines, that it constrains his future actions and empowers the war powers legislation that advocates are trying to build the bipartisan majority for. The move from fringe to mainstream in the removal conversation tells us something important about how Trump's Iran conduct is being evaluated across the political spectrum. We have seen throughout recent history the moments when the machinery of constitutional removal was most seriously activated in Trump's political career. January 6th involved specific documented conduct, a rally, a march to the Capitol, the breach that provided the factual predicate for impeachment. The current situation is different in important ways. It involves public statements, apocalyptic rhetoric about civilizational destruction that produce a different kind of legal and constitutional argument. The removal conversation is happening because the statements themselves are the conduct at issue, not because of a specific discrete action that clearly crossed a constitutional line. That distinction matters for how seriously the removal talk should be taken as a genuine threat to Trump's continuation in office. But it does not diminish the political significance of the conversation itself, because a removal conversation grounded in the president's own public statements about his intentions in an act of war is a conversation that directly implicates the question of what the military and the cabinet should do if they believe those stated intentions would constitute illegal orders. The 25th Amendment framing specifically matters in this context. Section 4 provides for removal of a president who is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, a provision most commonly discussed in terms of physical or mental incapacity. But the constitutional text does not limit the definition of inability to discharge the office to physical incapacity. It provides the vice president and cabinet with the authority to make that determination based on their own assessment of the president's condition. In the specific argument being made that Trump is making military decisions based on maximalist rhetoric, incomplete strategic analysis, and the kind of brinkmanship that produces civilization will die statements, is an argument about functional fitness for the specific responsibilities of the commander-in-chief role that is at least conceivably within the scope of a Section 4 determination. The argument is not being made by the vice president or by cabinet members. There is no evidence they are considering it. But the fact that advocacy organizations, members of Congress, and even one of Trump's own allies are raising it publicly means that the argument is now part of the official record of how his Iran conduct is being evaluated. The political consequence dimension of this situation is also worth examining. The volume of constituent calls and the movement of removal talk into mainstream discourse has real implications for the administration's political room to maneuver. The war powers votes in Congress, 50 to 47 in the Senate, a 7-vote margin in the House, reflect the building bipartisan pressure on the administration's Iran war authority. The removal conversation is a related but distinct pressure mechanism. The war powers votes are about limiting specific military authorities going forward. The removal conversation is about whether the president's conduct to date justifies the most extreme institutional response available. Both are forms of pressure, and both together create the political environment in which Democratic leadership is hosting accountability calls, crafting war powers legislation, and navigating between the vocal removal advocates in their caucus and the practical reality that removal is not currently achievable through the constitutional mechanisms that exist. The administration's response to the removal conversation and to the civilization will die. Characterization deserves acknowledgement. The administration would argue that Trump's Iran statements are rhetorical expressions of resolve rather than literal operational orders. That a whole civilization will die tonight was a warning about the consequences of Iran's continued nuclear development and proxy activity rather than a specific order for civilian targeting military strikes. They would argue that the subsequent ceasefire demonstrates that the rhetoric produced a desired diplomatic pressure rather than the catastrophic escalation critics predicted. They would argue that the removal talk is primarily partisan political theater, that Democrats who cannot remove him through elections are attempting to use constitutional mechanisms for partisan purposes. Exactly the kind of weaponization of impeachment and the 25th Amendment that Trump has consistently characterized as illegitimate. And they will argue that Republican control of Congress makes the entire discussion moot as a practical matter, regardless of the merits of the underlying arguments. These are real arguments. The gap between rhetoric and operational intent is a genuine distinction. The subsequent ceasefire is a real data point, and Republican control of Congress does make removal through the standard constitutional mechanisms effectively impossible in the current political alignment. But here is what those arguments run into when you apply them to the political reality of the situation. The volume of constituent calls, 257 inches a single congressional office in a single day, is not coordinated political theater. It is genuine alarm from people who heard a president say, "A whole civilization will die tonight," and are asking their elected representatives what is being done about it. The specific legal framing, genocide threat, violation of international law, 25th Amendment fitness, is being applied by a combat veteran, a member of the Armed Services Committee, and a major advocacy organization, not by partisan political operatives writing fundraising emails. And the MTG data point, however tentative, is the specific piece that cannot be explained by partisan dynamics. The removal conversation is happening in a political environment where Trump's own most reliable defenders are at least raising the question in public. That is not business as usual for an administration managing routine political opposition. That is a specific and significant signal about the political pressure being produced by the combination of an unpopular war, apocalyptic rhetoric, record low approval ratings, and the grinding economic consequences of a conflict that was supposed to be over quickly. The palace coup is not coming. The removal is not happening through constitutional mechanisms right now. But the political firestorm is real, and it is adding to the pile of pressures that the administration is managing simultaneously as it tries to close a deal that appears closer than ever and seems to keep not closing. Trump's civilization will die tonight. Statements about Iran triggered the most significant wave of removal talk since January 6th. Democratic members of Congress, including a combat veteran and a member of the Armed Services Committee, publicly said Trump has committed impeachable offenses and should be removed. Greenpeace unfurled a banner at the White House calling for immediate removal for war crimes and specifically urging the Vice President and Cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. Congressional offices logged record constituent call volumes about Iran, impeachment, and the 25th Amendment, with one office receiving 257 calls in a single day, characterized as genuine alarm rather than coordinated campaigning. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene has flirted with 25th Amendment talk over his Iran brinkmanship. Democratic leadership is focused on war powers legislation rather than impeachment, because the political math of Republican congressional control makes removal through constitutional mechanisms effectively impossible in the current alignment. But the removal conversation is now firmly in the mainstream political discourse. A political firestorm landing on an administration that is simultaneously managing a fragile deal, a collapsing ceasefire, record low approval, and the grinding economic consequences of a 4-month war. Not a palace coup, but not nothing. The constitutional pressure and the political pressure are both building, and the specific information asymmetry between what classified access members of Congress know and what the administration is saying publicly is becoming the next major fault line in the war powers fight. The story is far from over, and the coming days and weeks will reveal whether this removal conversation represents a temporary spike in political pressure or the beginning of a more sustained challenge to the administration's authority to conduct the Iran war without meaningful congressional oversight or approval.